This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
So the meeting's being recorded. To start, we have no minutes to approve. Am I correct, counselors?
Sent them.
You did? Okay.
I sent them
Do
after
you
our last
remember
meeting.
what date they were? Could you make a motion? Was it July?
It was June 1st.
Okay. JP, you remember that? I remember a meeting. I don't remember the date. June 1st. JP, you're muted.
I have June 1st as the meeting date here
Okay.
on my.
June 1st. I do remember getting minutes. All right, JP.
I remember getting minutes and I remember reading them.
So can I have a motion to approve? One of you?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the June 1st meeting.
Second, Connie?
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Does anyone else, either further discussion? Sorry, it's been a while since I did a meeting. Hearing none, Counselor Kwasinski,
Aye.
Counselor Denham,
Aye.
Counselor Riss says aye. So the first thing is, I'm going to jump to the conflict of interest exemption because that should not take any time. Because reading Julie, Julie Busa is here, Connie. Okay.
Okay.
And
Yes, I am.
you see me, Julie, and there's other members of the council here. I read your letter. I think it's, first of all, a special committee, I forget what it's called, special
municipal employee.
Special municipal employee doesn't need to worry about conflict of interest, but you wanted to cover yourself. I think having a scientist on the Conservation Commission who's knowledgeable here is fantastic. And I certainly have no problem personally approving your conflict of interest exemption. You want to say anything? Because everything I've read suggests that you've been very good for our city.
Thank you. No, I think I said everything that I really wanted to say in the letter. It's, I'm happy to serve the city. I think that my dual roles from the professional side with Fussin O'Neill and as a resident volunteer as the chair of the Conservation Commission, I don't really see a conflict between them. I'm working for the city in both capacities. But I did want to be just open and make sure that everyone understood and was on board with that situation. So that's why I submitted the disclosure.
Okay. Counselors? JP, go ahead.
I certainly can appreciate having a scientist on the Conservation Commission. That's very important. Someone experienced. The questions I have is, I think for the public's knowledge, for those who may not have read the information, I think a quick short summary by the applicant would be appropriate for the public to understand, those who would be watching this and not visualizing the actual written material. And I guess in my mind, the projects that you're working on and what you would do in certain situations, I think would be appropriate to mention. For example, recusing yourself from matters, and also just how you handle this. So that I think would be very helpful, if that would be appropriate for the chair to approve.
I think it's fine. I agree. Transparency. So maybe mention where your company and the city might be in conflict and how you would recuse yourself.
Sure.
Describe the conflict as you might see it, I guess.
Sure. So I'm a senior resilient scientist with Fussin O'Neill. And in that capacity, I manage projects that are city projects. I've worked with the city to obtain grant money, for instance, for the Cherry Street project. And that project does have a portion of it which had to have Conservation Commission approval. So that's a perfect example where I recused myself. And so anytime that project comes up on the Conservation Commission, I recuse myself. I leave the room or leave the meeting, depending on whether it's virtual or live. They continue the conversation in my stead, and I just stay completely out of it from the commission side. And that would be how I would handle any project of this type that is a city contract that I'm working on from my paid position with Fuss and O'Neill that also comes before conservation.
Okay. Does that answer? I think that's pretty adequate. JP, you feel okay with that?
I think it addresses the issue of any time a project you're working on, it would be quite appropriate. So I think that clarifies the situation for us and makes our job, I think, an easy one in this matter.
And the other thing for the public, the chair of the Conservation Commission has nothing to do with the hiring of the organization she belongs to. That has to do with the mayor, the planning department, whoever does that hiring.
Very important point. That's quite appropriate.
Just so the public knows that's the way it's going to be.
Yes, and in fact, I can add that we've always had a number of commissioners since I've been on the Conservation Commission that work for consulting firms. And when we, as a Conservation Commission, need to call in a peer reviewer for a project, we never even solicit bids from any of the firms that we are employed by. They're just not on the list.
Excellent. I think that again, that satisfies our questions in this matter. I guess one other thing though would be how many members of the Conservation Commission are there, so that if you recuse yourself, how many others would be involved in the project to make decisions?
There are, when the commission's full, we have 7 members. We are full now. And I'm the only one who works for Fuss and O'Neill, so no one else would need to recuse in these cases. So you'd have 6 people considering if everyone's in attendance.
Super. Thank you.
Connie, do you have any questions?
So what would you do in the case of a tie in that situation?
What would you do in the case of a tie?
That has never come up since I've been on the commission. I know that it does in other towns, but the culture of our commission has always been really to discuss things to the point that everyone is pretty much in agreement. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where we've even had a no vote. I know that other boards in the city do, but our culture has always been to discuss to the point of everyone feeling comfortable with the decision.
Consensus, that's good.
Consensus is great, if I may. However, I would think that the standard rules of committees would prevail. Robert's rules, perhaps, Dan, that if there is a motion and if there is a tie, then that motion would not pass.
The motion wouldn't pass.
Or consensus would
back to whoever without recommendation. But I don't know. I don't know enough about Conservation Commission authority. So I would imagine if there was a tie vote, a no and a yes, in something in which you're recused, the no would be the case. It wouldn't pass. So, but you're saying that rarely happens.
That almost never, I would imagine.
Right.
Consensus is your preferred means of proceeding.
Yes, and I have a vague recollection that somewhere in the Wetlands Protection Act regulations where it discusses some of the matter, I think there's something, I may be thinking of the conflict of interest regulations, but I think there's something in the WPA that actually discusses what happens if you don't have sufficient members to make a vote. And I think there are some specifications for how that gets handled. I could take a look and refresh my memory on that.
Thank you. I have no further
Let's
questions.
hope that doesn't happen. Councilor Zaret or Councilor Gomez, any comments or questions for the candidate? We do have 5 councilors here. Okay. I certainly feel very, very grateful that you're contributing to our city, Julie. And I'd like to see a motion made by one of our fellow committee members to approve the conflict of interest exemption for Miss Julie Busa.
I would move to grant the exemption for Ms. Julie Busa in this matter.
Second,
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Counselor Kwasinski.
Aye.
Counselor Denham.
aye.
Counselor Riss says aye. So I'm going to bring this forward at September 7th meeting, Julie. So you could chime in if you want, but I think we'll have unanimous support. At least I hope we do. Thank you very much for attending.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You don't
Thank
have to
you for
leave,
your-
but we're done with your issue. So we have a gun violence resolution, and I want to apologize to the committee. This was presented June 1st, but I couldn't meet, Councilor Zara couldn't meet, and it's his resolution. I'm just going to do a couple of general things that I've been thinking about. I have no problem with gun resolutions. We have one of the toughest gun laws in this country, in our state. In fact, it's been said if our nation adopted our gun laws, we'd be a lot safer nation. That being said, the gun resolutions obviously help. We've had one of these. So, Councilor Zaret, I'm thinking, is this redundant? I'm sure there's new things. And I apologize. I didn't look at the old one before you brought in the new one. But I have to say that gun violence is directly dealt with by our police department. Any resolution in my mind that puts forward any new ideas, and they're not binding, but any new ideas, I feel ought to have the support of the police department. Because if they don't have that support, it becomes a Second Amendment divisive thing, and I don't think that's what we want. Our officers are out there in the field, and they're the ones getting shot at a lot, besides the other, God help us, school shootings and things. And Uvalde, Texas, put a bad light on law enforcement because, frankly, Gibby, they were cowards. And that's not good. If we're going to have law enforcement intercede in gun violence, drug gangs, and everything, they're hired to have that courage. Anyway, that being said, I am going to ask you to present this, but I wanted to deal with the fact that Connie's got a whole new idea. And Connie, in my opinion, there's enough changes in there that either we deal with this and go through one by one what amendments we want to make, and that could take a while. Or two, maybe you meet with Councilor Zaret and go over this and maybe come up with a compromise. But that, to me, because it's a new document, and Councilor Gomez, you should chime in, would have to be presented to the council as a new document for review at the September 7th meeting. And I say that because there's enough differences in the two languages that I feel, or enough in the resolution at the end that I feel we should have a compromise. Or third, if you feel strongly, as you do, about your resolution, you submit it as an alternative. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel comfortable, for transparency's sake, dealing with your resolution when the public didn't get a chance to see what your thoughts were ahead of this meeting. And our meeting was designed for Councilor Zaret's resolution as he presented it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know where we want to go. I just wanted to bring it to the floor. We have the president here. This is good. JP, you're online. How do we all feel about this? Because I feel we should be talking about Councilor Zaret's resolution. Maybe some of your amendments could be put in, but I feel like you have a lot of strong changes that I don't know where we would go with this meeting. So Councilor Zaret, I'm going to have you present it. I'm going to make you a host so you could put it up, because I'm a little worried that I'm going to put the wrong one up. Oh, you're not in the meeting? All right, let me see if I can get it. I'm going to put it up and make sure that I've got the right one up. I opened this today. Give me a second. I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought that was on.
No. So you guys see this? Does it work?
Oh, I'm not on.
Is it on here?
No.
It didn't.
Not yet.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I have it open on my computer. I don't.
No.
Oh, wait. Oh, you're getting close.
All right, let me go back here. There it is.
There you go.
Is this the correct one? I put it in my,
It looks, I mean, I think so.
This
It's,
one, right?
yeah, I mean, there's two that should look, let me see.
That looks like your-
Yeah, then, yeah.
okay. So obviously all the whereases are obvious to me, but if you want to present a lot,
Yeah,
you go
so
right
I
ahead.
just want to give the history behind this. So this isn't really asking the council to accept a new resolution. This is a reaffirmation of a process we've already done twice. So this resolution was born out of a number of incidents of gun violence in the country, and for me specifically, in terms of what resonated for me particularly was the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, which occurred in, I think, October of 2018. That was my first term on the council, and it struck me at that point that as a elected official and city representative, and with an opportunity to lend my voice to the community, that I could look and see what I could do in terms of my response to that. So I sat down with a few people. Certainly, the first person, just for the sake of transparency, that I spoke to about this was our chief of police, to get a better idea of what the what's already in place and kind of what sort of measures our local law enforcement would like to see in terms of both what they're already doing for enforcement, but also programs and community outreach. This was a collaboration that involved Moms Demand Action, Every Town for Gun Safety. The first set of language and subsequent changes were developed with both of those groups. And Fred Gutenberg, who I don't know if you know who he is, but his daughter Jamie was killed in the Parkland shooting. He also, there was a copy shared with him as well. So when Uvalde occurred, and we reaffirmed this in 2020, I think the first one passed in 2019, and then subsequently the next term, with gun violence, only seeming to be on the increase and ongoing issue in our country, I thought it would be good to reaffirm it. And then after Uvalde, I thought it was appropriate, and since then Highland Park has occurred, and was many others, I thought it was appropriate to basically request a reaffirmation, because Uvalde, and certainly all the others that came in between, was 21 people dead, 19 students. So essentially what I did was I went back through our existing resolution, updated the statistics, and tried to look at what might have been outdated in terms of the actual action points, and what might have already been addressed or not relevant anymore in terms of legislative points, and basically present that to the council.
These are basically requests for legislative action.
Legislative action, and then updated statistics since our 2020 resolution, because unfortunately nothing, this is still an ongoing issue, and the numbers have unfortunately increased. I was unaware prior to our meeting in June that there were concerns about the inclusion of law enforcement in the language. After that concern was raised, I went back to Every Town and had some correspondence with them with those concerns specifically expressed, and they reviewed our language, made some statistical changes, and I think the current version you have is their most recent edits.
They being
Every Town for Gun Safety. So they're
okay.
They're a large national organization. They were instrumental in the national legislation, the bipartisan national legislation that just took place. And so that's pretty much it. I mean, I would concur that. So first of all, my approach to this in terms of the involvement of law enforcement is how can our law enforcement, both locally, state, and federally, offer solutions in terms of decrease, not how can they respond actually actively in the sense of like what happens when there's an active shooter and how they respond. I mean, obviously that's part of their job. And I appreciate that they put themselves in harm's way, but it's not, okay, what guns are you going to use and how are you going to act? It's more like, what can we do to educate our residents, to be safer around guns or to decrease some of the images around guns? How can we be responsible gun owners? And how we can develop local policy and state and federal policy. And so then obviously, again, after some concerns were raised about that, I thought it was important as we have access to law enforcement resources here in the city, just to understand how they felt about their role in this. And I know the chief's here, Officer Sergeant Kirby, sorry. And so that's pretty much that's what I
Could I just ask the resolved parts,
Sure.
which are the action parts? What's new in that from the last one we did?
Oof. I'd have to look, and I apologize.
It seems like we've done most of these.
Yeah, I mean,
Some of the things are new. The Charleston loophole, I think, is something that
Charleston
came up.
loophole, some of the background checks. I think I'd have to look, Councilor Riss.
All right, I'm not. I'm going to ask the chief. How this is a request for legislative action on these. And can you hear me, Chief?
Yes, sir. I can hear.
I don't know if you have the resolution up, but I'm already up full.
Okay, I'm gonna sit closer to you just so I couldn't hear it. So
Let me put it up even further. Okay. All right, Chief, the main thing I'm wondering about is this is a request for legislative action. I'm wondering how many of these resolved sections are already in place in Massachusetts, because we have a fairly strong gun law, shall I say. Is any of this stuff, I don't know if you're on.
So are we talking about the one that Councilor Zarrett put forth?
Yes. We're only talking about that for now.
Okay.
I mean, there's the background checks, for instance. The background checks are federal, but is the state more strict?
No, nobody does them better than the state of Massachusetts and the police departments in the Commonwealth. Nobody does background checks better, both state and federal and local. And we have the ability. The police chiefs have the ability to deny unsuitability. So even if it's not a legislative violation or legislative action, the chiefs can still deny and revoke on suitability alone. That isn't legislative, which is not common
the Supreme
throughout
Court
the country.
just did something about that. Well,
The Supreme Court in the New York case said that the people can carry concealed, and in Massachusetts, there's no such thing as non-concealed or concealed license. If you have a Class A license to carry, you can carry concealed or outside your person. So that the Supreme Court case really didn't affect Massachusetts at all. The only thing that would affect it is if Councilor Riss applied for a permit in Easthampton, the restrictions that he would have with Easthampton would be none, as long as he passed a background check and took the training and was qualified to apply for a license.
just so everybody knows, I haven't applied for a permit.
some municipalities in Massachusetts were restricting the issuance to target and hunting or target practice, period. And so now the Supreme Court case where it affects Massachusetts is we can't restrict any reason for the licensing. So that was what came out of the Supreme Court case in New York. Is the only change in Massachusetts was we cannot restrict the reason for the license to strictly target or hunting, which would mean that if we just did target hunting, you could only take your firearm and go target practicing. If you were carrying it and you walked into Cumberland Farms, you would be in violation if you weren't going target and hunting. But the Supreme Court said you cannot put restrictions on the Second Amendment, essentially. So, and we Easthampton have always had none for restrictions. If you're qualified to carry a firearm under a Class A license, you had no restrictions. And the Supreme Court basically upheld what we've already been doing. So along that vein, and our background checks through the state and through the feds are very extensive, and the state's very, very, very strict on our background checks and how we do them. And then they verify what we do at the state level.
So pretty much a lot of these resolved issues, Councilor Zaret, are for legislative action at the federal level.
That's correct. Yep.
So before I turn it into other councilors, I just wanted to ask you, this current resolution, I don't know, the one that I have on the screen, which Councilor Zaret approved, you have, you're okay with it, if I'm hearing everybody correctly. Bob?
Yeah, Councilor, if I could add one more thing.
Sure.
I know there was some language proposed about storage of firearms and strengthening the legislative action along the lines of storage as it relates to actually getting a license. Improper storage of a firearm is a criminal offense, and you're going to lose your license if you're improperly storing firearms.
I don't see that in the resolution right now. Councilor Zaret, gun storage is in here?
In mine, I think it's just providing resources to educate the public on responsible gun storage and safety protocols.
It's just providing resources is what's in there.
Perhaps.
Right, and along that vein, we do that. We hand out.
Wait, guys, say it again. We can't hear. Go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, along that same vein, we, the police department, in addition to doing all the licensing for the city, we also have a program where we provide trigger locks to folks, either as they come in for licensing or if they request trigger locks. So we have boxes of trigger locks that we provide for gun safety storage through the police department.
Okay. Given that, I'm going to open it to floor. Councilor, I'm going to keep this resolution up. President Gomez, could you see who's raising their hand?
I saw the move.
Go ahead, Nicole. Did she hear?
Yes.
Yep, I'm here.
I can't hear.
Okay.
Thank you. So a couple of comments here. I read the one in front of us now and had a conversation with Councilor Dunham about her amendments offered. The procedure is outside of my purview, but I do want to mention or think about, like, this is a resolution that the council has signed on to before, and I've done a very similar resolution supporting two very fine not-for-profits that work to this end. Over the last year, seeing, what's going on with gun violence or whatnot, I take exception to language that for reducing gun violence, the police department is in this resolution. The police, as Chief Alberti stated, like gun checks and their community education process and trigger locks, our department really steps up and does that. And candidly, that's state protocol and law. So if a police department didn't do the many things that the chief mentioned, then the police department or the city would be in violation. And I agree with Councilor Dunham around mental health. Let's be really honest. When you look at those statistics, it's not initiation. When you're talking about mass shootings, initiation by the police department. I think that there's also, when you're talking about other pieces of gun violence, they involve guns that are ghost guns. They involve guns that are bought legally, maybe for parents. We've seen this over and over again, and we've really seen an uptick since the following year. When the city council affirms, the city council also represents the police department, not to mention the residents who happen to be employed by the police department. So Councilor Dunham's language has a point to it. I think that's directly related not only to the topic of gun violence and mass shootings, but it's also realistic of what happens in Easthampton and what doesn't. We are a day away from a mass shooting. We never know. And that's been proven by research. And there are some things in here that are, are covered by law. And if that doesn't happen, then the resident or the person is arrested and charged with the law for, in the criminal justice.
So if I could just interrupt you just a second so I understand your point with regard to what I have on the screen now is the language involving the police department. All of those actions you're saying are unnecessary in the resolution because they're already covered by police policy and law by the state. They're not, you don't feel like they need to be in there. Am I hearing you right on that?
Yes.
Okay.
If this is about gun violence and gun violence and mass shootings, the police already have protocols getting ready to stop that. They meet the threat when they know where the threat is, and that's direct and indirect through through detective bureaus, through tips. And as far as the AA-15s or in language around the type of language, I just, it's a resolution. I think it is a window into what we would like to see. And the reality is, and, Chief didn't speak to it, but I've spoken to him, is, it's about outgunning. The AR-15s aren't typical weapons that are used by our police force, but we do have them. And I think the point of Councilor Denham, and I will say this very briefly because they're her words, that level of weaponry is not historically the type that has brought down or helped prevented a mass shooting. I'll steal, I think it was Councilor Risk's word about, you're hired to have that courage. And our department certainly does. And I think that the request or the thought in the resolution amendment around AR-15s is a hope where we would move. And while it's a much less serious point, I would refer to Councilor Derby's resolution and subsequent ordinance around buying hybrid vehicles. We did not have the potential nor the technology to do that in 04 or 08 and then 2012, but we still put it forward as a value of the city. And I think that's the intent of the council, and one I happen to agree with. And, I'll just wrap it up by saying a policy around law enforcement that already exists in a resolution seems redundant and confusing. Thank you.
I don't want to go into the AR-15 issue, but I would say, Councilor Zaret, that the other thing that occurs to me from the mayor's point is that if this first 4 items, which refer to the police department, it suggests that they're not doing it. Does it imply that we are saying to them, please do this because they're in the resolution? And I just thought of that. Does it do that? I mean, I tend to agree. Do we need it in there if they're already doing that work?
Well, I think it speaks to, well, first of all, I would also refer to our 2 members of law enforcement here to determine what they infer from that. I think that considering that this language was developed with our chief of police initially, I don't think so. I think it speaks to resources that are available that might not be known by our residents, as well as describes and illustrates more than the bare minimum of what's required by state law, but also how local law enforcement can be resources for peace and for reduction, and things like developing safety protocols and gun locks. It's not, I don't know enough about, and the chief and Sergeant Gribby can certainly speak to it. I think that I don't know if those are things they have to do. They're things that they can do and that they're willing to do, as well as offering education to the community, which is not what they necessarily have to do, like as it pertains to, you know, the extreme risk protection order. So that was why I put it in there. And again, the chief, these were some of the points that the chief gave me 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that removing mention of the police from this kind of removes an important piece and removes the status here of police as guardians instead of warriors. So that's kind of my thought. I mean, there's probably, I agree, and I'm hearing what the speaker said about there may be some modifications, but you know, in terms of what's redundant and kind of rhetorical, what's kind of highlighting opportunities. So that's all I would say.
Chief and Officer Gribby, go ahead, and then I'll open it up to Counselor Denham. Hasn't spoken yet, and she has a right.
Well, JP had his hand up.
Oh,
so-
you know what? JP. I don't have the picture here, so JP.
I see it right. Well, I saw it earlier, so.
JP, I'll go to you. I just want the chief to be able to respond to the mayor, and then I'll go to you next. Is that okay?
Thank you.
JP, I see you.
Thank
When
you.
I have sharing the screen, I can't see everybody.
I understand. So I just wanted to clarify if the chief and you say Officer Gribby, who's in attendance, is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, could actually see or understand what version we're looking at. It looked like the resolutions for the federal government and the resolutions for the city were pretty short, maybe about 6 or so for the federal government and 5 or 6 for the city. And if you weren't aware of exactly what it says, then we could repeat that. I know a couple of versions passed around, and I wanted to be sure we were all talking about the same one. So
I've already checked with both Counselor Zaret and Officer Sergeant Gribby. What I have on the screen, if you see it, is what we're talking about.
all right, but I thought the chief couldn't see the screen, so that was what I.
Oh, well, Chief, it is. I'd like you to respond. Lot to say here. Why don't you respond?
Since he was on the telephone, on a telephone.
Right. So, no, I'm on a phone, but I have in front of me in a hard copy, I have Counselor Zaret's proposal. So I can speak to what we discussed 3 or 4 years ago. And not only have we been doing those things, we're going to continue to do those things. So I don't know if that answers your question, Counselor Risk. As far as redundancy goes, we are doing those things, and we're going to continue to do those things. If that makes any sense.
You have to do them. Some of them is state law, as the mayor said.
Yep.
So what about my point that putting them in a resolution, does that infer or imply that you're not doing them? Do you think that comes out of it? Or does it, as Counselor Zaret says, reaffirm them?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it just reiterates that we're doing those things and we're going to continue to do those things.
Well, the mayor feels that they don't need to be in the resolution, so you heard that.
And that's entirely up to the councilors and the mayor.
Before I open it up. JP, just a second. JP, I want to let Officer Gribby say something, then I'll go back to you.
I mean, I agree. I think it can be a little bit of it may just not be a well-known, so like people just don't know because it's not necessarily something that's being advertised or it's being put out there on a regular basis or like proactively, but it is something that we do provide a lot of that, you know. So I think like you were just saying, it just sort of puts on paper what we are tasked with and what we are accomplishing. So I don't think it's a negative thing.
On the other hand, if it's not there, it's not a negative thing either to me, because you're doing it, you know. JP, then I'll give Connie the floor because she's been patient.
No,
Very patient. But,
fine.
so I'll be brief. I guess I am leaning very heavily towards the changing some of the language, because to me, it implies, the way it's written, that the local and state government representatives provide resources to educate the public on responsible gun storage and gun safety protocols. Are there resources? Does the police, does the city provide resources? Because if we do, that's great. I don't think that language needs to be in there. If we need to provide additional resources, I think, great, let's discuss that and let's make it an issue, and it should be in there. But that seems to be confusion to me, whether we're doing something and resources are there or we're not doing something. For example, and I could go through each one and probably continue along the same lines. So the question is there sufficient, are there additional resources that are needed to be able to accomplish the mission of educating the public on responsible gun storage and gun safety protocols here in Easthampton, for example?
Well, and mental health.
Who wants to answer that? Bob, or is there any other resources that are not being provided for?
Well, I think from the police perspective, and I think to, some of the counselors' amendment is, I think there could be more resources put towards mental health along the vein of gun violence for sure, and community outreach. Certainly we're working towards that with our community social worker, but there can always be more resources put in that category for sure.
Oh, okay. I think we're stuck on whether or not we need these four resolutions that involve the police department. I'm okay with going either way. I hear the mayor, and it may not be necessary because the police is already doing it. I hear Councilor Zarrett and Officer Gribby that they may be reaffirming. We have to remember this is a non-binding resolution, so it's informing the public no matter how we do it. My concern would be, it's still there. Are they going to think that you're not doing it? Because we had to put a resolution together.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, like.
The word continue to.
Affirm the current role of law enforcement in educating, blah, 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 blah. I do agree with that. I do also appreciate, I think it's implied but not well spelled out about the role of mental health and mental health resources. It's kind of squished into the end in terms of, calling on the CDC, but I agree that we have to highlight what's available here, that this is less of a capital law enforcement mission, more of lowercase in terms of their role around creating framework. So yeah, I agree that I think the language could be modified in a way that kind of affirms what's being done, as well as making it visible, because some people might not know what's being done by the police department here, as well as resources tangential to the police department, such as other members of public safety, and specifically our community social workers.
Well, anything that could be added to the language that takes away the ambiguity of whether or not the police department is providing this, or we take it out because it is, and it's something simple like encouraging the police to continue their efforts without having too much specificity in there. Any kind of compromise like that. Again, because I could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want anybody to think that the police department's not doing this stuff. They have to do this stuff. I agree with the mayor on that. So I'm putting this out there because I think we're heading to the point where we may have to come back to this with new language. We're talking about mental health language, and I want to give the floor to Connie about language she might want added to it. But I think if there's a way in which we can get a resolution that answers a lot of these questions, I'll say that I would rather a lot of this language be really used to something a little simpler. That's what I'd like. I'd like language that reaffirms or encourages mental health study, laws, also language that talks about our new, you just said it. the
Yeah,
person.
community
Community. And let me just go to Connie here. You have you had a lot of changes. Obviously, we can't do all of them tonight, but if there's some things in there that you really hope you could add, what would they be?
Oh boy, I don't know how to take notes about myself.
Well, what you can do is listen to the meeting afterwards.
Oh, okay, good idea. What did I say exactly? So when I want to acknowledge first that this is the first time I've seen this. I wasn't here in 2019. I wasn't here in 2020. And so this is my first kind of view of this. And so when I was, going through some, and I'll get to the pieces that I added, but I'm just my initial take, right? So when I got to the second bit about whereas the United States has a higher rate of gun violent death per 100,000 than countries like the Middle East, second to other places. To me, that was reading that people of color around the world are more violent than people in the United States. And I think that that's something that we have to be aware of, right? That was the first thing and I understand the context of that, but this is when you think about concern about grievance, anger, why people respond, why people act violently. Why people act violently in these areas is vastly different and out of the scope of what we as a city council can do. I can't control gang violence in sub-Saharan Africa, right? I can't control war that's happening in the Middle East, et cetera. And so that to me was concerning, right? And I understand the why in a global context, this is where the United States is, but when I read that as a white woman, that is the first thing that kind of stands out to me in terms of, and when I think about sub-Saharan Africa, there's like how many countries, right? And we're talking about the United States. And so that was one thing that in particular stood out to me. Additionally, I think what initially, when I read this, and I know that Councillor Riss, brought this up in terms of the response to what happened in Uvalde, right? That was very, and that was kind of right on the heels of that, right? And so that was very disconcerting. I think the other thing in terms of mention of the police, I think the police do an incredible job within the community in terms of responding or being first responders, et cetera. However, when I read this, it reads that the police are the only people who suffer trauma as the result of gun violence, right? So kids should have a safe place to have, go to school, et cetera, but the police are the only ones who experience trauma as a result of gun violence. And so that was something that kind of stood out to me, right?
It doesn't say only, though.
It doesn't say only, but it doesn't mention the fact that other people experience trauma.
Okay.
Right. And so
I understand your point.
Right. So that was something that was a bit jarring to me. Right. In terms of support for the Second Amendment, I think that that's enshrined in the Constitution. So that's not something that particularly resonated. Right. This just didn't resonate with me. Right. And then when we get down to the, and we've already talked this, right, about these things, right? I think that the police can offer these things and they should offer these things and they're expected to and they're required to, et cetera. But my concern initially when I brought this up was we have to be thinking beyond the police in terms of what we're doing in the community. And I don't think that the police are the only end all be all in response to how we address these things. And that was some of what I tried to address so in the amendments, I tried to basically add to the thinking, right, of some of these pieces in terms of it's not just the police that experience trauma, right? It's a community, right? And the police are a part of that community, right? And I don't think that they should be treated any differently within the context of grief and, the impact of that on them, right? We suffer as a community, we try to work together as a community, and we have losses as a community. And so I think that distinction, happened. I think I tried to add some of the pieces that, to expand on some of the pieces that Councillor Zaret mentioned here in terms of this, I don't have my, well, I do have my glasses, but they get all foggy when I wear the straw. Where is it? Background. We talked about background checks. We talked about holding people accountable who are purchasing weapons, etc. And so those are some of the pieces that I added to that. And in addition, for those people who haven't seen this, who are watching this, I also added in there that I think that, and the mayor alluded to this, was I think that I don't think that the police should have AR-15s in their, be able to use them. They are weapons of war, and I think that we live in a very fearful society, and I don't think that we should be thinking of our streets as war zones. And what they do to the human body, nobody should be allowed to do, whether it's average Joe citizen or the police, right? The children of Uvalde had to be recognized by their clothes. Like, they were unidentifiable. And I don't think that any state institution should have the right to inflict that type of carnage to the human body. I don't, and I understand the need to be safe, right? And if you look at what happened in that mall, you had a person who had a concealed weapon, no tactical training, no police training, and I don't agree with concealed weapons, right? But he was able to stop that particular shooter. And if that person is able to do that with zero training, I'm sure he target practice and things like that, then I think that the police should be able to do that, particularly when you think about the amount of resources, the amount of backup in some instances. But I don't think that we should condemn on one hand and condone on the other. I think that there's just inconsistencies there that I just don't think are acceptable. And I'm not saying that the police are going to agree to that, but I do think it's aspirational. Those weapons need to be removed from our streets. And some of what I proposed in there was more action on the part of the federal government to do that. And I think that, we as a community, we need to be more active, more engaged, more thoughtful, more creative in how we are going to protect the residents of our community. And I don't think that responsibility falls solely to the police. And that's what I tried to highlight in my amendments. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, let me respond by saying there's a lot of what you said is okay. I understand the sub-Saharan Africa issue that sounds important. I think a lot of people suffer trauma besides the police. I don't agree with you on the AR-15s, except if the language was aspirational, that would be more appropriate, in that someday our police should not have to have AR-15s. But there's a lot of, it's not in our state, thank God. A regular citizen is not supposed to own one of those.
Sure.
But it's the drug lords, and the police will say, we're not going to face off against an AR-15 shooting at us. And you're right. Maybe at times they can deal with it with just a pistol, but they'll say they need not to be outgunned. And until we can get them completely out of this country, they're going to filter their way in here, because the people that have them are not the law-abiding citizens.
Sure.
And so I'm a little leery about that language. Aspirational, someday it may not be necessary. We hope it won't be necessary for the police department to carry AR-15s, but to just say we want them removed, first of all, I don't think that's something within our purview. But on the other hand, I think it's difficult for me to leave our police department under that kind of threat, because it's out there. Fortunately, in our state, it's not as bad as in other states. Anyway, Councilor Zara, your hand's up.
Yeah, so.
And I'm going to go back to the
I just want to
meeting.
acknowledge everything that the speaker just said. Just to be clear, I mean, I understand a few things. One is that, once again, this is vetted by a national organization whose sole goal and purpose is to address gun violence. Now, yes, I did use the word trauma as it pertained to losses by law enforcement, but I feel that the majority of text is reflective of vast trauma among our children, among our educational system, among communities broadly, among people of color. In terms of the geographic locations I used, I would have liked to have included Europe. I couldn't find statistics. These are just geographic regions of the world with strictly no intention of any implicit racism at all. I do agree that we need to potentially consider language that reaffirms prior legislation that expired in 2004 that evaluated the access of non-law enforcement and military people to certain kinds of weapons, such as AR-15s and high-capacity magazines. I do also agree that we have to expand who we're recommending are people in our community. So I do think that while law enforcement plays a key role, there are other people such as our mental health providers and other people, our educators, our schools, our parents, everybody. So I do think that we need to provide stronger language there. And I think that's a really well-made point. It's certainly not the point that the police are the only people who could do this, but I totally see how it could be read that way. And I agree that we need to make this a collaborative community thing.
I have to cut you off for a moment.
Yeah.
There's another meeting about to start, and I'm going to say that what I would like to see happen is maybe Councilor Zarrett and Councilor Denham, you guys could get together with some kind of compromise language. I would agree that there may be too much police department language in there, and there needs to be more language about other possible collaborative helpers in this area. But this gun violence resolution, it has an urgency in the sense that, we want to make sure we reaffirm it, but there's no legislative need to get this done immediately.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's enough to discuss that we should continue this discussion at the next meeting.
Sure. And look, in all fairness, we've already done this twice, and I don't want to take up a lot of the time or availability of the council, working through this if we've already reaffirmed it twice. I didn't mean to make it such a,
Well, we always have new people. Connie's new.
Oh, no. I understand that.
The point I'm trying to make is she sees the resolution, so we can do better.
Yeah,
I think her points are good.
Yeah.
We could do better.
Yeah.
There maybe just needs to be some compromise language. So I'm not saying get rid of it. All I'm saying is if you two can come together and find ways in which you can add language that Connie's providing into the resolution, especially in areas that add those other collaborative people that can help, especially in the mental health area.
Mhm.
I think it'd be great.
Sounds good.
But for that, I'm just going to say, councilors, I'm going to schedule a new meeting at the next council meeting, and we'll continue this discussion, hopefully by then. Now, if you have new language that you want to provide, Councilor Zarrett, it'd be great if it got into the packet, because I'd like to reaffirm it and get it, because this is totally different than what you sent in June 1st, what we're talking about.
Yes. What you're talking about. I'm sorry.
If you don't want to do that, fine.
No, I think.
But if we do come up with a new resolution between the two of you and we could add some compromise language, I think the full council has to resend it to the committee.
Mhm.
So that would mean next Thursday is your deadline to get it to Barbara.
Yeah, and I think that.
So Connie, I don't know how you feel about that, but I have to end the meeting because I promised 6:00 for the.
Next Thursday is the deadline?
That's the deadline for you guys to talk to get it to Barbara.
Beyond that. Yeah, I mean, I think that there were excellent points made. I definitely appreciate the input.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying, there's
I'd
enough
like to-
changes in there that the council ought to look at it again, and it would be transparent for the public to see it on the council
Agreed.
agenda.
Yeah.
So, JP, okay with that? Because I got to conclude here.
As much as I'd love to see the discussion, I'm just concerned about conflict, about open meeting law violation by working together
There's
to
no open
create.
meeting law violation. Connie, Counselor Zaret is not on the committee, so we're okay.
Ah, beautiful. Why do I think you are? Oh, wait. Because you have
Great
so
that you're
many
not on this
that you put
committee.
resolutions you put forward.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? Somebody?
I'm the-
Make a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Counselor Kuzinski, can you second, please?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Counselor Kuzinski,
Aye.
Counselor Denham,
Aye.
Counselor Riss says aye. I will schedule a new meeting. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.